When I was in college, I worked for a local hospital, one of the largest in the North Georgia area. I won't drop names because they probably don't want me to mention them here, but this hospital was huge. I'd worked clerical jobs in a few other hospitals, and you could have easily fit all of them inside this facility. That being said, it was a mismatched monstrosity of old and new. The new medical promenade might have been a modern architectural marvel, but areas like the ER or the admin hallway still look much the way they had in the 1970s. It's a place at war with itself, constantly changing, also constantly staying the same. That's probably why there are so many ghost stories connected to this place. Working at the ER desk, I came in for a lot of rumors, especially since I worked the night shift. Security had an office in the ER, since it was where the biggest train wrecks usually happen. This meant that Carl, the night watchman, could usually wander over and have a cup of coffee or watch a YouTube video if I wasn't checking people in and he wasn't putting out fires somewhere. David, the late-night maintenance man, and Mark, the 11 to 7 switchboard operator, were also familiar faces around my desk, and they'd usually come by and have a drink or share a YouTube video if they were on break. Between the three of them, I'd heard of quite a few good stories from after hours. Some of them were kind of funny, like the nurses Carl walked in screwing during the security check one night, or the time that the handsome ER surgeon, Dr. Logan, cried to Mark on the phone for 3 hours while he was stuck in the elevator when it had stopped working. These stories were fun, but they inevitably led to stories about the hospital's haunted areas, the weird occurrences that sometimes people witnessed. Some of them were clearly bullshit, like David telling me that his ladder had disappeared from the 4th floor stairwell and had appeared on the roof, but some of them were too weird to be pure fabrication. Certain areas of the hospital were certainly more active than others, places like the South Promenade, where a girl had jumped to her death from the 4th floor railing. David came to me one day, wide-eyed, as he said he'd seen a shadowy figure jump from that very spot and land on the tiles. Nothing there when he went to go investigate. The way he looked, that led me to believe that he wasn't full of crap. Then there was the matter of Mark's phantom phone calls every night. Mark claimed that he got at least 4 to 5 phone calls from the courtesy phone on the 3rd floor, every night between midnight and 4 a.m. Caller was never there, never said anything, but Mark was sure he could hear a little whisper under the static. One night he'd recorded the noises on his cell phone and sent them to a friend who was into paranormal stuff. When his friend had processed it, he said there were some key phrases in there, things like Jackie and baby and love, but the rest had been gibberish. It happened at the same time in the wee hours, most every day, and Mark had sent Carl up on more than one occasion to see if people were pulling a joke on him or something. Carl had always reported the same thing. The phone was unplugged and no one was standing around it. Yet the calls still came. Then, of course, there was Shaky Leg Mary. Many members of hospital staff had seen the entity known as Shaky Leg Mary. She had been seen in the ambulance bay, in the ER, in the pass-through hallway where she had been wheeled into surgery, but most often than not, she could be seen wandering the OR corridors, deep in the night. She had been a homeless woman that had been run over in front of Mary of Mercy one night, probably where she had got her name since no one knew who she was. This had happened long before I had been hired. They told me her skull had been crushed, her lungs were mostly collapsed, and her left leg was a tangled mess of bones and flesh, hence where she got her name. They had rushed her to the ER as quickly as they could, but she had died on the table, and no matter what they did, she could not be resuscitated. She had made frequent appearances every night after that. So when Carl came staggering up an hour ago, looking starry-eyed and pale, I knew he had seen something. I figured he'd had another situation with a combative patient, but it turned out to be a little worse than that. I just saw her, he whispered like he was afraid to say it out loud. I looked up from my YouTube video and clicked pause after taking a long look at her. Saw who? I asked. Shaky Leg Mary. I saw her in the surgical hallway. I told him to tell me the story, and he obliged. Carl had been doing his rounds, as he was wont to do most every night, when he saw her. Carl had a schedule to maintain, you see. He had to sign a logbook at several different spots throughout the night, and he could be found most any old night wandering around, checking doors, checking for people hanging out in the corridors, and just generally making sure everything was secure. It was about 3 a.m., and he was making his way briskly about his appointed rounds, hoping that he could stop in the cafeteria and get a cup of coffee before he had to go upstairs. All he had to do was cut through the surgical OR hallway, check the operating room doors, and then he'd be home free. He had just opened the door when he saw her. She had been standing in the hallway, he said, and he had pulled out his flashlight to get a better look at her. He was just about to yell at her, tell her this was a restricted area, when he finally noticed her leg. It was twisted up like a bent signpost, and he watched as it flexed weirdly beneath her. Her hair was dark and oozed with something pink and viscous. Carl swore he could hear her breathing raggedly, the air hitching in oddly as her deflated lungs tried to pump it, and the bulb had popped when he dropped the flashlight, finally recognizing her for what she was. The sound made her turn, and he said her squashed face looked like a ruined jack-o'-lantern as the bulbous eyes stared blindly in his direction. She was as far away from me as that water fountain, he said, pointing to a fountain that was about 30 feet away. But that leg, man, that leg didn't stop her from coming after me. Carl said she screamed like a wild animal, loud enough he was surprised no one else had come to see. And then she had hunkered down on all fours and charged him grotesquely, that leg sticking out. Carl had backpedaled, trying to run, but he had tripped over his feet and fallen on his rump at the least opportune time. She was gasping and closing in on him, jaws opening weirdly and a mouth that was mostly broken, when Carl remembered the door between the two of them. The door had a maglock, and if he closed it, she wasn't getting through there without a passcode. So he kicked out at the door, and it slammed just as she came in. He kicked out shakily, and the door slammed shut between them just as she was about to jump on him. She hit it like a cannonball, and then screamed like an angry wildcat as she slammed into the door again and again. As he sprawled there, panting in the lighted hallway, that slamming was finally enough to get him back on his feet, and he ran somewhere he knew people would be. That's what had brought him to my desk. Carl later got David to agree to go into the OR with him, to make sure that it wasn't some homeless person in there high on meth and tearing up the joint. The two of them turned on all the lights and explored every OR room and storage closet in that hallway, but all they found was old surgical equipment and cobwebs. She had disappeared as quickly as she had arrived, but they did bring me down there to show me something before I left. David showed me a heavy indent on the OR side of the door, and it had left a D mark in the metal there. That door's a little bent, too, he said. I'm sure they'll have me fix the track on it before the week is out. Although, he said emphatically, I won't be going in there after dark. Carl never went back into that OR hallway again. Said they could fire him if they wanted to, but he'd be damned if he would. He always just sort of faked it from then on, going around the long way, and the legend of Shaky Leg Mary continued to grow. Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Blake. I hope you liked the video tonight. It's based on a true story of sorts that somebody told me when I worked in a hospital in Georgia. If you're listening to this, then this is our first video, so yay! I hope you liked what you heard, and if you do, come on back for some more stories. If you'd like to follow me, I'm going to try to update every Sunday, though I'm thinking about doing a throwback story every Wednesday as well from one of my older books. Kind of like what I do on my TikTok, which, if you like what I do here, you might consider visiting me there. I do a lot of other stuff over there. So, I think that'll do it for now. Thanks for joining me tonight. This has been Dr. Plague, signing off.